This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hello and welcome to Immigrantly. I'm your host, Sadia Khan. So here we are in December. Can I be honest with you? I'm feeling all kinds of things right now. I'm overwhelmed, a little sad, and just wondering where the time went. I kid you not, the time is flying. Every new year brings that mix of hope and anxiety for me because I don't know what the next year holds. For me, honestly, it's a bit of a struggle to be optimistic and to be excited for the new year, especially this year. And you know what I'm talking about, right? But I am trying something different. Right now, in this moment, I'm surrounding myself with people who radiate positivity, who really inspire me to think outside the box, and who create allyship for others. Today's guest is someone who does exactly that. Julio Salgado is an artist. Through his vibrant, unapologetic work, he challenges the status quo and uplifts voices that are often silenced. His art is so beautiful, colorful. It spoke to me. And I was so impressed with how simple yet profound his art is. As a queer, undocumented creator, Julio uses art to reimagine what visibility, joy, and resistance look like. Isn't that incredible? I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Julio, how are you doing?
I'm good.
I can see your art in the background. It's so vibrant. Why did you decide to use colors?
It's a question that people often ask me, especially given the subject of my artwork, which is immigration. I identify as a colorful individual. People that know me could probably describe me as a colorful person. And I couldn't help but add color to the work that I do. I am also a kid of the 90s. I grew up with Daria and The Simpsons, King of the Hill. And so you could see a direct connection and influence of my artwork, but also like Frida Kahlo. It sounds like a cliche to name Frida Kahlo as an icon to me as an artist, as a brown artist, but she really was somebody who used all of the colors in her artwork. And so I think it was a mix of all of that, like as a Mexican, I grew up with a lot of colors in our artwork. And so it's so natural to me to, pick all of the colors and put it into my artwork.
Julio, you came to the US when you were 11 from Mexico. And at the time, you did not speak the language fluently. So art became a tool for expression for you, right? How has your art evolved to now?
Oh, in so many ways. I think artists should always be evolving, right? And I truly hope that I've evolved from that 11-year-old that came to the US in 1995. The first year that we were in the US, we moved around a lot in Southern California. That's where I moved to. In 1996, my family decided to make a home here in Long Beach, California. And one of my first classes was actually an art class. And I mentioned Frida Kahlo, and my art teacher, Ms. Gaynor, uh, she introduced me to her work. And I knew of Frida Kahlo, but it wasn't until I was here and not being able to communicate that art became my way of communicating, right? I was always the kid who was drawing and doodling, and there'll be a kid next to me who would be like, "Oh my God, you could draw. You can't speak English correctly, but the fact that you can draw, like, let's be friends." And so at a very young age, I realized that this was going to be my tool to communicate, right? Now, even as an adult, as a 41-year-old adult, there are things that I feel like I don't have the language for, or I feel like I'm going to say the wrong thing. So a piece of art, a drawing, will help me get the point across. And with the magic of social media, I get to have, all these fellow students who are like, I'm feeling the same way. Thank you for making that piece of art. So in many ways, yeah, my artwork has evolved, but in other ways, I'm still that kid who didn't speak English. And the only way to communicate was through my artwork.
What were you communicating through your art at the time?
At the time, I was just trying, I'm sorry for all the teachers who are listening to this, but I was like the kid who would like draw the teacher and you can see my style is very caricature like. I would make caricatures of my teachers. I would make caricatures of like other kids who would be like, draw me, draw me. I've always been, interested I think people, yeah, you can, again, see it in my artwork that people are just so interesting to me. It was my way of gifting something, right? Like it was like, I find you so interesting. Let me draw you, right? I'm sure the teachers at the time were like, Julio, stop, like pay attention to class. But I was very lucky. I mentioned Long Beach here, the Long Beach School District is very pro art. And so I mentioned Ms. Gaynor, who at a very young age saw that I had a gift and I was drawn to drawing. And, she would encourage that. Going to high school, I was always encouraged by teachers who saw something in me they pushed me, into that, like lean on that creative aspect of my life, which not a lot of people are blessed with that. And so, I don't know, like that really made a huge difference in my life because then once I became an adult and, went to college, I really followed that path.
You've mentioned your undocumented status has been a driving force behind your art. But I was wondering if there were no borders, no need to define status, what stories would your art tell then?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. And I often ask that myself, right? Like, I'm like, if I wasn't undocumented, if I wasn't queer, right? Like, being a queer man, like, also has informed a lot of my artwork. And so if I didn't have that, I don't know. I don't know. That's such a good question. It wasn't until I was an adult that I really was very much, oh, I'm going to use artwork to call attention to the issues that are affecting me. But as a kid, I was always drawing, girls. Like I would draw, dresses. I don't know, it might be a stereotype to be a gay man and, draw girly things. I love watching RuPaul's Drag Race. And it's one of my favorite, it's the only reality TV show that I watch. And a lot of the queens that are in that show talk about growing up and doodling and, drawing dresses. And I was like, oh my God, I was doing that. So maybe I would be a drag queen. But how lucky am I, right? That even though for many years I saw being undocumented as something that would hinder my life, and it did in many ways, it has affected my life and many life decisions, I get to turn something negative into like, well, let's unpack that. I get to unpack. I always say that being able to draw or just any creative writing, any creative outlet, when you're dealing with all this life things that you are out of your control, art becomes a therapy. Art has become my therapy. I turned that into something. It's weird to say like a career, but it has opened many spaces that I never thought were possible. Like as soon as I was like, well, I'll probably try to go to college for a little bit, but I it stopped there. I couldn't imagine life outside of the educational world. But that's always been my life, right? Like there's always been, when I was in middle school, like, oh, high school, how's that going to be like? When I graduated high school, how am I going to move through life without this documentation that is so crucial to just do regular things in this country? But I always turn back to art, and I always either wrote or made a drawing. I worked in the food service industry for many years. And I always say that, hearing people complain about their food and like while me working, I'm like, oh my God, I need to write about that. I need to draw. And usually when I would work kitchens and I would get out of work like at midnight, like from midnight to 3 a.m, those were some of the most creative moments because I was like, I need to write this down. So again, right, like art has been a way for me to let this go.
Willie, you said it's a weird thing to say that you made a career out of it. Why do you think it's weird?
You had Carla Cornejo talk about this, right? And sort of how it's strange how for many years we were hiding. We were hiding behind our school and sort of like these things that would protect us from facing the reality of our undocumentedness. But then it's weird that all of a sudden a lot of institutions and all these places are reaching out to us to go talk to their students or commission me for something regarding immigration, right? It's strange, but at the same time, like, yeah, it should be us telling that story. You should hire immigrants to tell, to make immigrant art, right? So it's definitely a weird, because I say weird because while I get to do this, there's other folks, there's other immigrants who do not get that opportunity. They are people like my father. My father is still undocumented and he's getting older and his physical ability is not the same as when he was young, yet he still has to continue doing the same physical work. And there's this sort of, there's some sort of guilt. It's not necessarily weird, but it's guilt that I get to use my story to make art that in many ways have allowed me to pay the rent. It's something that we as creatives and folks who have gotten to a point where I get a Wikipedia page that's really strange that somebody did that, but it has allowed me, certain things. I by no means am out here balling, and like have all kinds of money, but the fact that I turned something negative into a positive, I feel very lucky and guilty.
It's so interesting the way you're framing your success, right? It's a typical immigrant way of framing it. As an immigrant, I know you're feeling guilty, you're humble, you're grateful, but you don't own it as much as a non immigrant would. Why do you think, as immigrants, we feel the need to justify our success or our achievements?
I think it's because I am still living with people who are in the same boat as I am immigration wise, but they're still struggling, and it starts with my immediate family.
But that's not your fault.
Oh, 100%. And trust me, I've had a lot of therapy. It has taken some therapy to like really take this sort of like it's own it. But at the same time, I don't want to forget. I don't think people should forget where they came from. People should remember that there were bad times and who knows what's going to happen next year. But the going back to the guilt that us immigrants we feel is because my mom and my dad are two of the most important people in my life, and seeing them struggle, seeing them, even though how much they tell me, Julio, don't worry about us, we'll be fine. Like the odds are unfortunately stacked against them. And so we feel that guilt because we are living it. We can't detach from it, right? But I remember watching Gilmore Girls when I was in college. And if for those who are not familiar, Gilmore Girls is the story of a single mom and her daughter. And the daughter goes to Yale and she studies journalism.
You're sure about the double E's?
Not at all.
Too easy it is, okay? And I'm done.
Close out. I'll cut and paste it to the final copy.
Closing out. Wow. So that's what hard work feels like. Apparently, I've been avoiding it for a reason. You in, Ace?
I'm in. Proceeding with the cut and paste now.
Daily news. Oh, man.
When that show was in the air, I was studying journalism, and I would compare myself to that storyline and how I was like, the mom owned an inn, and she came, like the mom, even though she had this like relationship with her parents, she had a very privileged life.
Her parents were so privileged.
Very. And so seeing that, I was like, oh, that is never going to be me. If anything, once I make something of, I need to bring my family. But while sometimes it can be really hard, and I recently wrote about this. I have a comic strip for the LA Times, and it could be very tiring, and the guilt could get you. I will still, in a weird way, not change that because it has given me so much material to work with. And so people go to school for this. People go to school to find themselves. I have life, help me, define myself.
You've talked about immigration, and I do want to unpack how we approach immigration in this country as a fellow immigrant. We talk about, we don't, but a lot of mainstream media talks about this dichotomy of good immigrant versus bad immigrant. I don't know if it was an interview or a video that I saw of you where you were like, let's embrace being a bad immigrant because we are humans. And that really resonated with me. I've been saying this for so long. By putting us in this binary, you're stripping us away from our humanity. Humans are messy. They make mistakes. They can be bad, good, whatever, right? And somehow there's this onus on us to be a certain way. How do you reconcile with that? And how does it feel to own the bad side?
I think there's no such thing as a fully good person. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing.
Although Americans are obsessed with being good people. I've heard from so many people, I want to be a good person. I am a good person.
I do want to believe that there's good in people, right? Like, of course, there's obvious bad and good, right? There's the bad people who are making policies that are, that are complicating our lives. Trump sort of has become the symbol of like, at least I'm not that, right? At least I'm not that. But I think if anything, America is showing us that there's complexity, right? Like you can vote for this person and not be quote unquote a bad person. And I can believe it, but so can I. So, as an immigrant, then I shouldn't be held to this high standard of constantly having to show that I'm a good immigrant. And if anything, immigrants who are going through the system as somebody who has DACA, I have to show this country every 2 years, check in and say, I didn't get in trouble. Here are the proofs that I've continued to be this quote unquote good immigrant. But going back to the art, in my art, I get to, like tell, and I use myself because I'm my only story that I, thoroughly know back and forth. It wasn't until recently that I started talking about my sobriety journey. And I've been sober for 4 years now. The first couple of years, I was like, I don't want to add to my list of things, right? Undocumented, queer, I'm sober. But I had to unpack that and be like, why am I so, if I talk about like being your full self, like this is part of who I am. And if anything, the sober journey, it doesn't see any race. It really doesn't see any political spectrum. I remember the first year that I started, it was 2020. We were towards the end of 2020. And let me tell you, some of the comments that I would hear in this AA meetings from people who were clearly racist and homophobic, but they were dealing with the same thing that I was dealing with, right? And so it was almost like I had to like, okay, but we have this in common. So, like we are all here struggling. So that's what pushes me to put our stories, because there are more stories of white people who are complex and are messy, and they get to be full human beings. And so my goal has always been that, right? To like not explain why I'm an immigrant, but just share my
Living life.
living life. Exactly. And that's a problem that we have right now in this country. Like, I don't know that people are not connecting with other immigrants, don't know their story, or if it's one of those things like, well, I know this one immigrant person and they're different than the others, right? So it's really my goal with the work that I do, changing the narrative, is like, I'm going to start with my own story and show the flaws. And it's hard. It is really hard. It's really scary because you don't know who is going to use that against you. But I can't help myself. And, and I learned from Carrie Bradshaw, another very famous show. Listen, let me tell you, white women growing up, like white women just, we're so present in the pop culture that I consume that I tend to make a lot of references to white women shows.
White women cry a lot, though. Not to offend any white woman, but they cry a lot.
They cry and they get to be messy. And I came of age during a time when there was some sort of renaissance for white women to be messy and complicated, right? Like in the 90s, you had musicians like Courtney Love and Alanis Morissette. Were using art to like say, I am not a little woman who stays at home. I am more than that, right? And if anything, I sort of am emulating that, because that's one of the things that we're so, that's what I grew up with. And in my art, my approach, I'm like, I'm more than a bad or good immigrant. I'm complicated. I'm all these things, right? And I get to tell my story.
I love the classification of white women being able to show their messiness, while immigrants like you and I are still struggling to really show our entire humanness, because it's like we are told not to. We are almost exclusively told to hide parts of who we are. What are some of the emotions you experience when you show your full self?
There's relief. There's relief that I am not holding it, right? Like I'm not holding it, and I made a little comic strip and now it's out into the world. There's relief. But then there's the immediate like, oh, how is this going to come and bite me? And I'm talking about like policies, right? Like how are my actions and my words going to be used against me if in the future I'm in the process of doing my advanced parole. My advanced parole is something that you get to use through DACA to leave the country for educational purposes or work or humanitarian purposes. And I'm in the process of doing that. And I got a letter back from immigration saying, oh, I need more proof to keep going on the process. And I couldn't help but think, I'm like, did they read my comic strip? Did they think I'm not worth it? Do they think? So there's paranoia as well.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. Paranoia. It took us 10 years to become naturalized citizens, right? From the day we entered this country, Julio, those 10 years were filled with paranoia of what can happen. What are we posting? What are we saying? How are we conducting ourselves? The mental and physical toll that it takes on people, on immigrants. Nobody can fathom that. A person who has not been through the process does not understand it at all. And I can't even imagine what you must be going through. This is like a different process.
It's so true because, I mean, again, right, going back to what this man is proposing for next year, changing the Constitution, changing the lives of many people who have changed their status, right? Like, I don't think that fear ever goes away. I think a good example of this, I don't know if you've heard of Real Women Have Curves. It was originally a play, and immigration was such a key part.
Pero, if you're so smart, how come you're not in college?
Because I don't have the money. I have to wait a year to be eligible for financial aid.
I always thought that if you were smart enough, a college would give you a scholarship. Well, maybe you should read some more and get one, so you don't have to be here making $267 a week hearing us talk the way we do.
And that play takes time in the 80s when there was all kinds of raids. And one of the characters, is scared of immigration. And then she's like, wait, I already got my green card. Like, why am I scared? It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. And so, like, if anything, I know why I get the paranoia once I hit post in that image that might be a little controversial. It goes away because I know there's a community of people that are not going to let me get deported. And I've been part of this community for over a decade now, since I started making a lot of artwork around being undocumented when, back in 2010, a lot of undocumented students were coming out of the shadows, as we called it, and saying, I'm undocumented and I'm unafraid, taking from the gay liberation movement and saying, the more of us that come out, the less of us are going to feel alone. Yeah, we're all very scared of what next year is going to do to me. We think about ourselves, but we also think about our families. But we gotta remember that we've been through this. And if anything, we've been through worse. There's been worse moments in our lives. We just don't know what this moment is going to look like for next year. And so I want us to remember that we come from a community who has fought back. The ways that and the things that we have now is because communities stood up and fought back. And I think of those things, right? And when I think about that anxiety, that sort of feeling of like, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble, it like slowly, stops. And then, I go back to, making another piece.
I have such a warped way of thinking about naturalized citizenship. And I'm like, oh, they are not going to strip people of that because they can't do that to white people. There are a lot of white immigrants coming into the US. And then I'm like, but they may find a loophole the way they did with Muslim ban, right? But it's so fucked up. Talking about Trump's 4 years, what are some of the headlines that really bother you? You're like, I'm done with these headlines. We need to move on.
Yeah, I think when the headlines only focus on the man who is making this extreme comments or the things that he's going to do, and they don't focus enough of this kind of conversations that you and I are having, Savia. Like the when the focus is the media grabbing the headline, the thing that's freaking us all out. Like I think that's what it is. It's freaking us all out. And so that's what annoys me to see. I posted this drawing that I made on Sunday night.
I saw that.
Yeah, that was based on Yolanda Lopez's image from the 70s. And I saw the headline, I saw the clip, the interview where, he's making this crazy comments about what his plans is. And then I go back and I'm like, I turn to the art. I'm like, I need to like step away from the TikTok. I need to step away from, because that is not even the TV anymore. It's like we're carrying the news in our phones every single day. And so put the phone down and go to the books, physical art books, grab them, touch them. I'm not saying stop being informed, but you do need to take a break from the constant headlines, because media's gonna media. Media's going to try to get those clicks. And so it annoys me that we don't get more of this kind of conversations. You are creating the conversation. I thank you so much for being very intentional in bringing guests who talk about our lives, because this whole week, as I was listening to your podcast, I was like, oh my God, yes, I needed this. I need to hear this. I am not alone in this, right? That's the thing. So next year, as people are dealing with the reality of the policies, we also need to chill and, as the kids say, go out and touch grass and live life.
Yeah, exactly. Live life, be happy, create art. But do you see different communities doing coalition building? Because one of my biggest concerns or disappointments is that a lot of our communities, they operate in silos, right? They don't work together as much. Have you seen that shift at all?
100%. You talked about the Muslim ban and Black Lives Matter movement. Like when things are popping off like that, I see people come through, whether it be in social media, whether it be just friends, like, hey, checking in on each other. Like, I know I'm not undocumented. I get a lot of friends in my circle of friends who are like, Julio, I'm not undocumented, but like, how are you doing? Checking in. It really talk about big coalition buildings, organizations coming together, but in the personal. Like, how are you reaching out to those who will be affected by a lot of these policies? And it shouldn't be just when things are going off and we're seeing the headlines. Like, it should be, a constant, right? On a personal level, some of the work that I'm personally doing with the Center for Cultural Power, I run this program called the Disruptors Fellowship. And in the Disruptors Fellowship is essentially, a place where people of color who want to write for TV and who happen to be undocumented or who happen to be disabled or trans, they can apply and be part of this fellowship. But what happens when you bring people from different communities is that you talk to each other and you are intentional in creating through the art. This fellowship is essentially about, folks who want to write for TV, right? And how to make Hollywood a little bit different. But the goal of the fellowship is also how to tell better stories, right? We're talking about the narratives that we're seeing. And I love to see people come together, whether it's somebody who is in the disability cohort talking to the trans and non-binary cohort, like how to tell better stories about each other. The whole point is to be talking amongst yourselves, right? At the end of the day, if you are not a white man, like, life is going to be a little bit different for you, right? I'm not saying that white men don't have issues. Don't misquote me here, whoever takes this out of context. But the reality is, it's a little bit different. I mean, if you look at the news of what's happening right now, the way that this man who shot the CEO, how he's being treated, I can't help but think about, what if he was a Black man?
I was saying the same thing.
Listen.
And we would have heard such a reductive, just one-dimensional, narrow verdict on what happened.
Yeah. As I'm looking at the photos and the comments, part of me is like, oh, wow, look at the world united on an issue because, we understand why people are mad and they don't have the sympathy, right, of what happened in this case. But putting that aside, I'm like, if the man that was captured looked like me, would it be a different story?
Very different.
Very different story. And so I I it, it's really hard not to think about when you are not a beautiful white male, when you don't have those looks, life is going to be a little bit different, right? And so I think we definitely need to be intentional in all the projects that we do, the art that you create, to be like it. We don't live in silos.
You're interconnected.
Yeah, and we see it, and we during the campaign, like the conversation around Black jobs versus your immigrants are coming and taking your jobs, as if there are no Black immigrants. That already is taking away the idea of like who is an immigrant, right? Like if you ask people who voted for like anti-immigrant policies, they will describe a person like me, like, oh, it's the Latinos, like the reality is immigrants, we come in different, shapes and sizes and colors. And also immigration is a global issue. It's not just something that it's a US thing.
I keep saying this. Margot Robbie is an immigrant. Ryan Gosling is an immigrant. Salma Hayek is an immigrant. I can go on and on and on. There are so many immigrants that people don't even know are immigrants. And that's what's so fucked up. Let's go back to your art. Now, you've collaborated with different people, organizations, but this may sound cheesy, but if you could design a dream project, what would it be and who would you like to collaborate with?
A dream project. Sorry, I'm like, let me think about this for a minute. Well, I mean, I'll expand on the current project that we're working with, the Disruptors. There is a need for different voices in Hollywood, right? And so I would love to bring in like producers and people that can green light some of these shows that people are, creating. On my personal like things that I have worked in the past, I think one of the reasons why I was drawn to art, I love magazines. Like Spin magazine was one of my favorite magazines growing up as a teenager, and I did a series of magazine covers with trans people of color. This was the time that Caitlyn Jenner was on the cover of Vogue, and and so a lot of trans people of color were like, well, she doesn't really represent, she's a white woman. and
She's a privileged white woman.
Very privileged. And so my idea was to, I'm like, well, let's make our own magazine covers. And I know a bunch of trans people of color, and I just reached out and I was like, can I draw you? And like that fulfilled my fantasy of designing a magazine cover. But imagine if we could do it like at a higher level and like actually create a magazine that had a bunch of people of color, and me getting to make art with other folks. And it was great. People really responded well to the images. But at the end of the day, what I loved about that project, it was that it was a collaboration. And one of the things that happens often, and that happened on Sunday when I made that image, and a lot of my art can be reactive. A lot of us make reactive artwork.
Nothing wrong with that, though.
Nothing wrong with that. Again, right? It goes back to mental health. I make the image, post it, it's out of my mind, and now it's for the world to deal with. But what I love about doing a project like I did, like the Trans People of Color magazine covers, was that it was so, like I was reaching out to people and like, yes, let's do this. Oh my God, can you add this? Like when collaborations become so easy and natural and like, oh my God, I needed to see this. Oh my God, I love, that's great. Like collaborations and people you can collaborate with, we can do it all day. But if we are not in the same values, if we're not sharing similar, ideals, it's not going to work. And the reason why a project also like the Disruptors Fellowship, we're on our 5th year now. The reason why it has worked so well is because there are people in Hollywood who are working in the industry who are like, I want to help. Like, how can I help? Right? The mentors that we have, people like Lindsay Villarreal, who has worked for like Tales of the Living Dead, Vida. We also had Courtney Purdue, who like as a writer for Gossip Girl and Goosebumps. These are folks, young writers who themselves are starting their career in Hollywood, but they want to help up and coming writers. And they're like, Julio, how can I help? Right? Those are the folks that I want to work with. Collaborations that come so natural and easy, and there's no having to like. I'm not here to convince anyone of my humanity. I'm not here to try to beg you for money. My projects come in so many shapes and forms, but more than what the project is, like that our values are aligned and that we want to do art, because that's what we love, that's our craft, that's how we communicate. But B, that we want to do it for the same reasons, which is to make sure that all kinds of voices, all kinds of, you have a menu of all the things, on the stories that you're watching, whether it be a movie, a short film, a TV show, we should be able to write those stories.
Yeah, and a podcast.
And podcast,
Julio,
exactly.
Do you have a dream collaborator in mind? Let's manifest dream collaboration, a wish list of people that you're like, oh my gosh, if I could collaborate with them. Because I do have a wish list of people that I want on this podcast, and I'm trying to manifest it as we go into the new year.
Oh my God. Sadia, I think I'm afraid to answer this question because they say don't meet your heroes. I have a list in my head of like singers that I would want to make artwork for. I have like writers who I would like love to illustrate their words, people that I haven't met, and I'm afraid to meet them and then them not liking me. So,
I was going to say you not liking them.
It's funny because, some of my mentors that I've had in my life are people that I admire from far away, right? Like one of my mentors, Aurora Guerrero, she's a filmmaker. Aurora Guerrero, she did Mosquita y Mari, it was like a film that came out in 2011, 2012, went on to Sundance, got a bunch of awards, and she now has directed for all kinds of TV shows, Queen Sugar and 13 Reasons Why. So she's a TV director. When I was in my era of like, I want to make my own TV show, she was one of the people that, I reached out, and she became my mentor. She actually became the sort of like floor plan for Disruptors, the program. I was like, oh, look, there's people in Hollywood who truly want to help, right? So maybe not everyone, but, so far I've been very blessed that the people, that the mentors that I've had, that I look from far away, have come through.
They haven't disappointed you.
They haven't disappointed me.
Julio, in the end, if you were to describe the United States of America through your art, draw me a picture of what that would look like.
Ooh. I tend to do workshops with students on how to come up with a poster, right? And I always say that the easiest thing is to draw. Like the drawing part, that's the easiest part. To come up with a message, that's the hard part. That's the thing. Like, I'm not so precious with the medium even, right? Like, I'm down to like, let's do stick figures if that's what you want, but as long as the message gets across. If I had to draw something, it would be a collaboration with someone, with more than one person, right? Like, I think the idea of this country shouldn't just be one person's idea. It's a collaboration of sorts, right? And the collaboration is not always easy. It could come out to a beautiful thing. I'm picturing a map. I will definitely have a map, music. I see music notes around. I see like different mediums. Like I see a laptop for writing. I see a camera. I see a microphone. I just want a show. I think what I see is like putting together like a fabulous show that everybody's enjoying and that everybody has a good seat to. Like you need a good seat to this show. Because unfortunately right now, there's some people sitting all the way in the back that do not get to see the screen. So a show.
Oh my gosh. Maybe you should draw that for us.
You know what? I'm going to add it to the things to do and I will do it and I will tag you all. I love that question. Thank you for asking me.
Julio, where can people find your work? Where can they find more information about the organization, the fellowship? Give us all the information.
Yes, you can find more information about the Disruptors Fellowship at artistdisruptors.com. You can find more information about the organization, the Center for Cultural Power. You can find us at culturalpower.org. And you can find me on my Instagram at Julio Salgado 83. That is the year that I was born, and I will never forget it.
Wow, thank you so much, Julio. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Sadia. It was nice meeting you.
I asked Julio to draw that picture of how to define US, and I cannot wait to share it with all of you. From Disruptors Fellowship to Julio's art to his personality, I am so impressed. And I'm so glad there are immigrants out there who are creating art, who are doing incredible work, and who are living life the way they want. This episode was produced and written by me. The editorial review is done by Shay Yu. Our editor and sound designer is Lou Raskin. Our theme music is done by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Come back next week. I have another very interesting conversation. Until then, take care.